So before I get into the standardization of humanity, I wanted to first answer a question from the comment section of a video. I think it was a live stream. That kind of leads into the standardization topic anyway, because it goes into dreams and cannabis. And I think he mentioned cannabis, but it was more about dreams. And where I come from is the separating us from our higher vibratory perspectives of reality is part of the standardization of the people. So back when the so-called consciousness of the people was like pretty low, cannabis was bringing people up. It was bringing people up beyond the point of deep control and belief in this system, in this standardization. Because back in the day, they used to call pot smokers people who smoke cannabis. That whole thing was specifically focused. And this is why I'm going into the relationship between standardization and race. It was specific. Oh, well, it's more than that, but you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. How this has been legally intertwined into our reality. So back in the day, the government used to label cannabis smokers as, people who wear zoot suits, the Mexicans, the jazz musicians, back then their idea of the thugs and all that other stuff was like the people who dance and play music that isn't standard kind of music. It's music that makes people move in these weird demonic kind of ways. And that's when they brought in the religious part too, to have another way of guilting and shaming you back into this standardized reality. So parents were following the perspectives of the government, which it made them even more racist, because now you have a reason why your kids are acting up. So this anchored racism into the household. If your kids were acting up, it's probably because they were out there with those damn pot smokers listening to jazz and wearing zoot suits and all that other shit. So, and who does that? Those damn Mexicans and black people. So this is how they made that shit a reality for the average so-called American household. And why today you have people who are their parents and grandparents and even them themselves are extremely racist and still have that same kind of mentality. So back then, cannabis, the different kind of cannabis, because today's version of cannabis is like genetically modified cannabis. So it's affecting us on more levels than one, and way more levels than what it was back then. But back then, just even basic cannabis was making people think outside of the box. And that box was based upon the belief in the system and the fear of the system. So the frequency of their actions in life were vibrating beyond the control of the system. So they made it illegal. So this is what happened with mushrooms. This is what happened with all these tools, psychoactive tools that were making people think and act outside of the control. They made them illegal. They made them only available to people who are so far outside the space that they don't care about the fear. They're just going to do it anyway. And the ones who got caught with it were thrown in jail. So you still have people who are in jail right now for cannabis charges. And now today you have the standard is to sell and smoke weed now. Well, we still have people in jail for this. So this is the double standard of this standardized mentality. This is why there's no justice in this justice system. They don't give a shit about you. It's about control. It's about money and so much more. But it has nothing to do with what they're publicizing it as. So cannabis itself, how I break it down is that back then, the cannabis was a way to put people in jail and also control the consciousness. But now the consciousness of the masses has reached a point that it is beyond, in my opinion, it's beyond the vibration of cannabis, where it takes you to. So it really has no effect. Like, people without cannabis are already not afraid. The fear level is gone in reference to the vibration of cannabis, what that does to people. And in reference to the consciousness itself, the vibration of cannabis isn't really bringing us up anymore because we have access and the ability to go beyond it. So this is why I'm saying they are legalizing cannabis, because when you make it a thing and your access points, your abilities are beyond that frequency, beyond that vibration, then you're actually bringing people down. And this is what I'm saying is what's happening with cannabis. And this is what happened with alcohol. We all know alcohol was legalized to do the same thing: put people in jail, cause problems in the family, create all of this depression, and to create this bringing of people down in so many different ways, and celebrating that depressive drug. So back when the system was just so bland, everything was bland, and cannabis brought you above that blandness, it was illegal. But now, since the people and the system that the people individually interact with internally and with themselves is so vibrant, it goes beyond, or at least the potential goes beyond, the cannabis bubble. Now the government sees a profit in allowing this to be legalized. So they trickle it in to maintain control, but also they let it go to maintain control of the consciousness, to keep it below what the true potentiality is. And the proof of that potentiality, in my perspective, is what I've been talking about for years now in reference to what it has to do with dreams. Because, like this individual who commented, he definitely is affected by cannabis in reference to dreams. Like it puts this cloud over your dream recall and dream depth. So I'll get into it real quick before I get into the standardization flow that I have planned out for this video. So after telling me that this individual has no recall in reference to cannabis, and it's the reason, pretty much the main reason why they don't smoke weed anymore, the question was, when I'm in lucidity, do I have to control it, or do I want to do that? And how much am I trying to do so? So in reference to that, in lucidity, it's very different. It's very similar to being awake. There are different layers of dreams. There are different intentions with dreams. There are different feelings in dreams. So I feel a different way in a certain dream. I feel a different way in a certain landscape within that dream. And I have a different drive and desire. The same in the waking state. Like, you don't want to do the same thing every day. Like, I don't want to make a video every day. That's not what I need to do. Sometimes I need to go out and play disc golf. Sometimes I need to take care of business in and around the house. Sometimes I need to rest. Sometimes I need to do nothing. And it's the same with dreams. It just depends on how I feel. And in dream space, it's easier to feel what, for me, because I've been paying attention to it for so long, it's easy for me to feel what it is that I need to be doing. Because the way that you tune into your lucidity is based upon, like, the feeling, the driving force of the feeling is the landscape for the dream, for holding that lucidity. So the way I navigate through the dream, another way to hold on to that dream is being able to hold on to the intention. Being able to locate what the intention is. The intention to do your own thing? Is the intention to act within the dream? Is the intention to, because if you do one or the other, that's not really lined up with what you're quote unquote supposed to be doing in the dream, then you'll break the dream. So in like a nightmare, when you get scared and you activate your emotional body, you fear yourself out of a dream. So in a sense, you're not supposed to be doing that, and you break the dream. Well, when you're in more complex versions of that sort of experience, if you're trying to control a dream that's not really supposed to be a controlled dream, then you'll break the dream. If you're trying to fly in a dream, from my own experience, and you're not supposed to be flying, you're supposed to be like engaging in the dream, then you'll break the dream. So the happy medium is to find if you're new to it, like find which one is the key, like what are you supposed to be doing, and then go with that. And then what I found is that when you engage in that experience, you'll finish the dream and go into a deeper space. Like you'll be able to go into what you are trying to do, another landscape where you're trying to do that, whatever it is that you're trying to do. So now that I've flown so much and I've done a lot of different things in dreams, the most attractive thing to me in dreams is to figure out what's going on naturally in the dream. Not what I want to do, but like what is this dream trying to get me to do? And then I'll do it. And then if that's just basically following the cues of the dream allows the dream to go on longer, get more complex, which gives you more time and more energy to become lucid in the dream. And sometimes when you go on that little adventure, you start to unlock a whole bunch of different things. You're waking up deeper versions of yourself. You're interacting in the dream, and the dream just you start to feed into it, and it starts to feed into you. So I've found that that's the most fulfilling and, in a sense, the most potent way to interact in your dreams. So the next question is, could you please share your perspective on how large landscape can be in your dreams? Because in childhood, I had these undescribable large places where I then drift, cities many miles. Okay, so yeah, this is there. I don't think there's really any kind of answer to this, because your dream space, how I see it, is this infinite space. So where does the complexity in the infinite end and the next space begin? So the landscape goes on as long as you're in a dream. So I've seen far. I've been floating in spaces, and this is another thing. It really depends on, I could go into this very detailed, but I'm not going to, because it's pretty simple. The dream landscape itself is based upon your focus. So what you focus on is going to determine that the access point and the landscape itself. So my focus has allowed me to go into different types of dreams. So different types of dreams allow different focus. And by types, I mean there's like this tangibility of dreams and familiarity in dreams that kind of anchors you into a deeper space and allows you to see more and go deeper and do more. In my deepest space, this is where it doesn't feel like a dream anymore. It feels, if it's like between 1 and 100%, and the 50% is like a waking space, and the other 50% is the dream space, this starts to leak into the waking space type of tangibility. And I don't know how to explain it yet, but that feeling really does affect how you see, what you see, how far you can go. So in one dream, I was in line to just fly. And in this point, I didn't want to fly in anywhere horizontally around the landscape. I've flown straight up. I went straight through the clouds, straight through this light blue into a dark blue and into blackness. And when I got into the blackness, I had my hands up to force my direction. And I could feel, once I went from dark blue into black, I could feel the coldness going down my arms and into my body, and then down my body. And then once it consumed my body, along with the color, the like blacking out, that's when I popped into another dream. So that's, in a sense, is it the end of one landscape and into another one, or whatever, however you want to see it? I don't know, but that's one thing that happened. I didn't bother looking back. That wasn't my intention, to look down and all that other stuff. It was kind of like outside of your vision in your waking space. It's just behind you. And I was flying upwards, so I was paying attention to what I was going into. So when I got into that space, I blipped into this cloud-like city where the silence was so silent. So it was beyond silent, extra silent. And the light was all sunsetty light coming in from like the side, very orange and reddish and beautiful, very serene, sort of peaceful kind of place. And I just sat there alone by myself. This was in my older dream before, or in the other dream video. And I just sat there until it was like boring, and then I left that place. But anyway, so that's one location, like how far I've gone in that way. In another dream, and this happens when I have dreams with loved ones who have passed on, there's an extra sort of energy and an extra sort of tangibility in dreams when you're dreaming with loved ones. It's kind of like activating another part of the dream. In this dream, I was in a world, the best way I can explain it, I was in a universe, in a sense. I was in a universe that was how we see like the stars and the blackness and all that other stuff, but way out in the distance, like in another part of in like the fake heliocentric universe, like between here and Mars or something like that. I could see a city floating in the darkness and the stars, just the light. And if I zoomed in, like squinched my eyes, I could see like, oh, that's a city, that's somewhere I could go. But between me and there, it was just kind of like I was just floating there. And I knew in that city was, when I got over there, it was kind of a map, almost like a video game map. But it was built and being built by my brother, who passed on. He was 6 years younger than me. And when I got into that space, I knew exactly what it was. And when I got there, I could look somewhere else at another location that he had built. It was like a city, and he was a skateboarder. So it was these places where you can, one was like a city you can skate around in, and another one was a place that he had painted. He was a painter. He was an artist too. So he had painted all of these locations. And one of these locations was a place that was reminiscent of all these different things that were a part of our life growing up. And this is why I said it was different. So you can see, in reference to distance, that's pretty far. It's not limited to a room. It's not limited to, a couple of miles. This is a different kind of distance sort of thing. You can't really measure it. That's why I said it's kind of different. In the question is kind of relative. The dream space is more complex than distance, in a sense. So I don't want to go too much in the dream, but that dream itself is a good example of like what that question is asking, as far as like how far you can go. In reference specifically to that, like on boots on the ground kind of dream, like I've seen far to where I could go over large distances, and then I'll just wake up after it gets boring. I ran when I run in dreams, I can run to where I start flying and floating. So how far is that distance? I ran through entire airports. You know how they have those escalators, or those flat sort of things that kind of pull you along, that look like escalators, but instead of stairs, they're just flat. Instead of using those, I was kind of running through the airport and floating like those things have you kind of floating over the space. And it was a long ways in that. So I've flown over mountains and through caves in the oceans, on the edge of the ocean, up, like I said, up into the sky, in cities, like all over the place. So there's no really limit to the landscape. Yeah, so like you said, these seem so enormous, like out of this world and larger. I would agree with that. Like I said, my dream was not limited to this world. I've had dreams where I've teleported, in a sense. I got into this black box. It was a military box, And I knew exactly what it was. And there were different things that were like this, but this one is very memorable because this was kind of like I knew what it was made for. It was made to move you into a different place, and there are different locations in dreams that you can go into that do this naturally. But this was like a military grade version of it. It was a black box. It was about the size of like a coffin, bigger than a coffin. It was all padded, but it was like vinyl padded pillows and stuff like this. And there was nothing in it. And as soon as you get in and close the little door, you wait for like a few seconds, and then when you open the door, you're somewhere else. So I've gotten into this box before, and I've shifted into a world. It was a different world where it was giants. And I knew it was giants because the buildings that were built were huge, and the statues that were built were huge. And there were these giant columns that were made of like marble, and all these statues were made of like marble. So like in one of those old Hercules or Jason and the Argonauts movies, those old kind of claymation part type movies. Well, I was in that kind of space, and there was something like an Olympic Games going on because there were tracks like where people run. Like I saw the track, and I saw people like shooting shit, and there was all kinds of shit going on. But I just knew that place was filled with giants. It wasn't only giants there were other people there, but it was at one point that place was a world of giants, and it wasn't this place. It was a different location. So that's another kind of like distance sort of thing. So that's pretty much the question that this individual had in reference to landscapes and dreams and stuff like that. I really appreciate those questions and people who share that information, because it's kind of reassuring to me that this is because like I said in previous videos, the dream space, like the internal space, is way more complex than what we've been, and we don't even get told anything. Like dreams are literally taboo, not even because of the government or not even because of the mainstream. Dreams are taboo because people have a taboo relationship with dreams, and that's what's so interesting to me. It's just like, what, like, even if you talk about dreams, like I talk about dreams with certain people, and they're like, they instantly kind of shut it down. They don't want to talk about it. Like it feels to them like they're missing out on something, and they know. And that's the thing, they know that they should be engaging in it, but they don't know why, they don't know how. And there's this kind of like childlike or playful sort of admiration of being able to do that. And there's kind of an embarrassment of not being, for me being able to go into those depths, but there's kind of this embarrassment for them not being able to do it, as if they should be able to do it. Yeah, it's a trip. And to know that the system is knowingly keeping people away from this, and now in reference to cannabis, are actively engaging in keeping people away from their dreams, it's just even more attractive and more driven. Like there's more of a reason why we should be checking this stuff out. And this is what I was gonna get into in this video. Hopefully, I'm just gonna read this and get through it. But because I've said this before, but this standardization of humanity is almost like a standardization of consciousness. I don't like using these words like humanity or consciousness, but for the sake of explaining the systems that are weaponized against us, this is where I'm coming from. There is a standardization process out there, and there are standardized examples of how you should do things and how you should act. There's a standardized communication style. They say to us, why are you talking white? What does that mean? Oh, proper? Oh, I'm enunciating my words, So this is why I go into like the race issue so much, is because if you don't act that way, then you're not accepted in society, and even more so in humanity. And beyond that, you have, with that being out there, you have an example of the standardized human. So this is kind of an introduction into what you should be like, how you should speak. And we know this. Like, so if that's the case, and you're not acting like this, you're not speaking like this, and in extreme cases, if you don't look like this, then you're wrong. You're less evolved, you're not intelligent, you're not what you should be. So these are all these psychological problems that we have to deal with that are in the infrastructure of the system of racism and white supremacy. All the shit that happens on the street, like actual people who are just blatantly like vomiting racist shit out because that's their belief system. Now, those are the side effects to the system of racism and white supremacy. The real shit exists in how we see ourselves, how we interact, how we visualize this kind of stuff, the standardized format of society, of humanity overall. And that standardized fixation exists it's been existing for hundreds of years. This was at the base of colonialism. The standardized concept was pinned up against the savage indigenous people. It was the baseline to steal their land, genocide our people, and destroy and take over the resources. And those actions, those criminal actions, are at the baseline of the superpowers of today. So for people to say that racism doesn't matter and all that other stuff, you're completely missing the entire point, the entire storyline that's going on here. The superpower, if you're talking about the new world order, the superpower, people in power and money and all this other stuff, you have to go back and to realize, where did they get that power? How did they get it? And who is this they that we're talking about? Who has gone around and colonized certain areas? Who's written books to wash out the humanity of indigenous people? To scientifically break down. And this can, like I said, in comparison to like people, truthers in reference to flat earth, they talk about science and the criminalization or the criminal nature of science. Well, yeah, it's criminal to create this heliocentric illusion, but it's also criminal to create this illusion that we are not human. To create a science that says your skulls are this way, you're not human. Like, this is what I'm saying is directly comparable. It's the same institution that has used heliocentrism to control the masses. Well, it's the same institution that has used racism, white supremacy to control the way we see ourselves and the way other people see us. You see this in this Ukraine shit going on right now. People are trying to escape war. They're trying to get on trains. For people who don't know, people are trying to get on trains to get the hell out of Ukraine when Russia's getting in there. And they're not allowing so-called black people on these trains. But they'll allow like so-called white people to get on the trains. So this is how far this system has gone in enslaving us and us enslaving ourselves through these systems, through this standardization process. And there's been a particular people that has been used, like I said, they couldn't do this unless they had an example of what standardized humanity was. And so-called white people are the standard. This is why it's so fucked up. And nobody can deny this because they have statues. They've chiseled their faces in the side of mountains on sacred land. They filled up Hollywood and the media and Congress with their faces, with these people. And beyond that, white is not even a thing. White is an illusion. White is an illusion just as much as heliocentrism is an illusion. And they have the same effect in many different ways. And this is the reason why you have so-called white people who are flooded into the mainstream media, flooded into Hollywood, flooded in your public education system, your teachers teaching your students because they want to get them when they're young, make them insecure about themselves when they're young, make them want to be like the standardized human when they're young. So they grow up and then they teach their kids to do the same thing. Only thing they see, who are the success? This is why they make them successful on social media. You had that thing with so-called black girls creating all these dance moves and dances and all this other stuff, and then not getting any credit for it. And then a so-called white girl does it, and then she gets out there on trending and all this other stuff, gets put on Ellen, and then Ellen starts dancing along. That's on purpose. That's what I'm saying. This video is to explain why that is. Because they have to emphasize the standard. And when you emphasize the standard, you're emphasizing the not standard, the savage. You're emphasizing the lack of being the right way. So you're empowering the people who fit that standardized mentality, and you're demonizing the people who do not. This is why Hollywood is flooded. This is why the Oscars, they say the white Oscars. This is why it's like that. They celebrate them. They give them trophies. They give them Nobel Peace Prizes. This is why in all the patents of the world, so-called black people invented all these things, but you will never fucking hear about it. Even in the slave times, they created all these things, and then the slave masters just took it and then patented it, and they got their name on it. All these inventions that were invented by people who were original here, who were the slaves here, who just had their shit blatantly stolen. This is another part of it. It's to hide their insecurity. So why was the standardization created? Because there's an insecurity in those standardized examples of people. So you can go into the recessive nature of these so-called white people, why they had to do this. This is a survival mechanism. They had to create something to protect their livelihood. And they protected their livelihood by making their reality something to be attained, something higher than everybody else. And how they did that was to create this fiat currency, put their faces on there, their standard face on the currency, in order to have you living. Your basic human resources are caught up in their standard fiat system. And this is not to say that only white people are behind this. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they are the examples. They are the ones that have been used to usher in this reality. And in that, they have celebrated. This is why they are defending this system, and why they are promoted, like in TikTok, they're promoted in the truther community too. Because the system knows that these standardized people are only going to go so far. They're not going to allow the system which they love and which puts them on a pedestal to crumble. They're only going to allow it to crumble so far. And if they are, the few amount of people who are looking to implode this system, they're going to take the longest to get there. And that means that this system can live as long as it can, through publicizing, putting these in a sense controlled opposition individuals out there and for everybody to see. So with this recessive complex, with these things that they are insecure about, they have to control everything. Because if they lose control, if they let people do the things on their own, their insecurities, what they're insecure about, will be more recognized. This is why Black Wall Street was attacked. This is why the indigenous people and their whole worlds were attacked and taken down. Because you can't have people living and thriving on their own, because it makes you look like you're not enough, like you have something wrong with you. So this is why they colonized these lands. This is why they took over. And this is why they celebrate their ways of life, their standardized versions of life, in order to, for one, to demonize the capabilities, the potential of our people, but also to maintain control over the real evolution of our reality. Because if they can control it, they can hide their insecurities underneath that control measure. And this is what's happening in your institutions. They don't want to show real history. They don't want to show their crimes. They don't want to show how they got to where they're powerful right now. They just want to show how powerful they are. This is what war is. War goes straight into the emotional body, straight into fear. And war amplifies this celebrating of this system. This is why so-called white people get, fly the flags so much, because the flag represents that celebration of that insecurity, that control. It's not for freedom. It's not for whatever they're selling out there. It's for the system overall. And in the truther community, a version of this control is that they're so empowered, so filled with this artificial authority that when you start celebrating yourself, when you start talking about real history, the shit that's been hidden by this system, when you start bringing that shit to the surface, these individuals who are nothing, they're nothing to you, you don't know them, they get on the comment section or in these little chat groups and they feel so empowered that they tell you that what you're doing is wrong. Your research is wrong. You're talking about racism, you're talking about the indigenous people, you're talking about this is wrong. They have the authority. Through that control measure, they feel empowered to tell you you're wrong. Even when you're breaking this down. And this is how this is existing as like an automatic defense in this controlled opposition through these people, whether they're controlled, like whether they're like paid commenters, trolls, or not. This same you know that this exists in reality because this happens on the streets every day. Some people start talking about politics out of nowhere, and then if I go deep and if I start like bringing shit to the surface that's hella deep, like you'll have people with the, well, it's not like that so much. And they'll try to passive, like this microaggressive, try to dismiss your perspective by saying, no, you shouldn't be focusing on that because we're focusing on this. Or that's just that, well, that little feeling that is dismissing you and telling you that you shouldn't even be thinking about that because you're wrong. Basically, you're wrong. And that's all they have to do. And they're right because they're standard and you're not standard. So they can just say you're off and that's the standard. Their answers are the standard. Yeah, so we'll talk about generations of racism, psychological warfare, our own experience with this shit, discrimination. And then they just have the artificial authority out of nowhere to tell you that you shouldn't even be talking about that. Where does that come from? Where did they get that fucking power from? Who are you anyway? Do you have like I said, do you have like Filipinos or Samoans that are coming out of nowhere? No, in droves, so-called white people. These are the ones who are doing this. It's very specific. And like I said, why? It's because they are the standard of everything. There's a standard of intellect. There's a standard of truth. They're the standard of religion. There's the standard of civilization. They're the standard of they've been put out there as the standard of everything. This is at the core of the system of racism, white supremacy. And as a result, we act and feel a certain way in response to that. So when we bring up these subjects, they call us racist and tell us what we should be doing to come together as humans. So this is the response in the truther community. This is that standardization of what we should be. We can't even think correctly. We don't have a standardized brain. So when we talk about racism, that's not standard. We need to be talking about humanity. So they feel empowered enough to tell you what the evolution of your experience is. So if you're talking about like healing yourself from generations of racism and all this shit connected to that, you're wrong. You're wrong. You shouldn't be doing that because you should be talking about humanity. If you want to separate yourself from those who have enslaved and are still currently enslaving and destroying your people, you're wrong. You should be talking about humanity. You see where this comes from? This is how these individuals have been weaponized. And it's not like a far-stretched thing. It's existing inside the modern so-called truth movement. So they tell you, they get all up in arms and they get strong when you start talking about racism and all this other stuff. But where was that anger? Where was that commitment to humanity when we were being physically enslaved? We're still psychologically enslaved and we're trying to break this shit right now. And they're all like strong about how you should be human and all this other shit. But when we were physically enslaved and they were building their empire on the blood and the bones and the backs of our people, where the fuck was that damn commitment to humanity. Did they give a fuck about humanity? No, because they were the example of how you should be. They were invited by this system that was enslaving us to colonize this land. They did it under freedom. They did it under the new world. They did it under this idea of evolving humanity. They were the examples of the evolved human. So they didn't have to tell you anything because they were living as the evolved human and you were the less evolved savage animal. But now that the tides have turned and their illusions are being seen for what they were, they can't even humble themselves to realize how fucked up what kind of system they were. They can't even acknowledge that they were a part of that system. And the system itself has got to where it is as a result of their actions. They're so unaware of themselves, like a narcissist, that they think that they have the authority to tell you what the fuck you should be doing to get out of that dark space. They want to tell you what truth is, what truth should be. They want to tell you what evolution should be. They want to tell you what humanity should be. They want to tell you when you're talking about what you're doing to get out of this shit, that you're wrong. Get the fuck out of here. You weren't saying shit about humanity back in the day when they were slaving the fuck out of us and creating Jim Crow, were you? Where the fuck was humanity back then? Who gave you the authority to tell us how to heal? Who gave you the authority to tell us how to get through this process of all the shit that we've been dealing with? That's like telling somebody how to grieve. You can't do that. People are going to grieve the way they grieve. They're going to heal the way they heal. But they're so fucking empowered with this fake ass authority that they think that they can tell you how to evolve, how to heal, how to grieve. And they want to be leaders of it. So it's not just telling you how to do it. They're telling you how to do it so they can remain in control. If we wanted to do our own nation, if we wanted to have our own culture, our own nation that doesn't involve the descendants of our oppressors, we should be allowed to and not shamed for it. We shouldn't be guilted or shamed for that. If we want to do our own thing outside of all the shit that's been going from the people that have been putting us through all this shit, we should be allowed to do that. It's very much no different than, like I said in the last video, than people who have their own Koreatown, Chinatown. The Jewish people have their own little area in town. Everybody has their own little area except us. Why? Because we're the biggest fucking threat. Because we are the original fucking Americans. And when we start doing our own thing, that means the entire goddamn nation is going to start doing its own fucking thing. And when you start doing your own thing, you become the standard. And those standardized illusions start to be seen for what the fuck they really are. And the defense against that is to belittle that process by narrowing it down to, oh, that's just reverse racism. You're being racist. You're doing the same thing. No, fuck that. Their defense mechanism, the controlled opposition of the people who are calling themselves truthers, calling themselves conspiracy theorists, calling themselves for humanity, the New Agers and all that other stuff, they have been weaponized. When they don't talk about this information, that is on purpose. They've been weaponized whether they know it or not. But the people who are actively doing it, how they do it is to belittle it, dismiss it, and project against you. As soon as you bring something up, it's brought down, it's shrunken, it's dismissed. And then once you're belittled and dismissed, you're projected. Oh, that's reverse racism. Oh, you're this, you're that. Okay. And then what happens to them? They become the standard again. And when you have everything locked into social media, it's very easy. Because everybody can get behind the idea of humanity because nobody does the fucking research. Nobody does the work individually to know where people who are talking about this shit are coming from. So they're caught up in their emotions. And the idea of humanity is just like love. Oh, it's just, humanity. The word humanity is just like another word. It's just like another word like love. It's the same thing. And who's not for love? You know, if you're not for love, you must be about hate. You must be about separation. This humanity shit, this new age perspective, everything is love and everything is one. It's no different. It's the new version of back in the day when they said America is the new world. It's the free world. And look at what that was setting the foundation for. They brought all these Europeans over here to this land under the guise of being free and being a part of a new world, an evolved human, at the expense of the original people that were here already. So much at the expense that they fucking enslaved us, destroyed us, stole our land, stole the resources, and then painted their own pictures in the dictionary of who an American really is. When you think of it, when people around the world think of an American, they think of a so-called white face. We're not even the standard of our own land anymore, because if we become the standard of our own land anymore, they become irrelevant. They will be seen for what they really are. And this is why your truthers and conspiracy theorists, they don't want to touch this subject, because this is the one truth that is taboo, because this is where it starts to get personal. This is why they talk about all the other truths in the world. They get hardcore on flat earth and concave earth and mountains or buildings and mud floods and 9/11, all this surface layer shit. Every other truth out there except the truth of who and what they are. Keep an eye out for that shit, because it happens in the New Age community. It happens in the conspiracy community. It happens in the truther community. All these communities that are backed by so-called white people, hard, but they won't talk about the fucking truth of their own people. And like I said, this is not to push blame or anything or make it only about that. This is only to speak about the fucking facts. Fact is, truthers will never talk about the depths of the system of racism and white supremacy. They won't, especially if they're being put on a pedestal and funded by so-called white people. If you're getting paid, if you got a whole bunch of so-called white people who are following you, you ain't gonna talk about white people. Yeah. You're gonna lose followers. You're gonna lose payment. This is why people who only talk about certain shit are put on a pedestal and other people are censored. So they keep it on the surface in order to avoid the roots, in order to bring in this new version of this new world. Back then it was the new world, freedom. Today it's the new age, humanity. And like I said, who are the masses of people behind those movements? When you think of the new age, what picture do you see? Are we just supposed to not look at that? Are we supposed to not see that that's a reality? And like I said, us wanting to live on our own and do our own thing is not the same thing as what they did. It's very much not the same thing. So don't let people try to convince you of that. We even tried to do our own thing within this system, and they still didn't want to fucking do that. They didn't want to let us do that. We tried to be our own people. We tried to be like, this is what Black Wall Street was. We tried to do our own thing within your own criminal ass system. And it was still such a threat that they fucking bombed it. And that is direct racism against direct people of this land. It was the KKK and the government teaming up that took out the Black Wall Street. And that same mindset, that same act, is the same mentality of the colonists going around the world and genociding, particularly so-called black people around the world. We're not doing that. We, just like everybody else in the world, just trying to do our own fucking thing and not involved. We don't want to try to conquer and take over, control and genocide hell other people, poison and all that shit. Nah, that ain't us. It's a specific group of people. We're not trying to affect generations of people to think about themselves a certain way and see other people another way. No, there's a certain group of people that are doing that though. And we're not the same. Don't put us in that same bubble. We just don't want to be affiliated with the people who are doing that. And the people who have gained their riches, they gained all of that, what they had, in order to distract from being a part of that. They want to control the way you see evolution, the way you see where you should be going next, the future. This is why technology is so celebrated. This is why fake space and fake space travel is so celebrated, because it's such a big thing that it's like love. If you don't get behind it, then something's wrong with you. Who doesn't love space? Who doesn't love humanity? Who doesn't love love? Something's wrong with you. We're not projecting onto people. That's not us. We just want to get the fuck away from everybody who's doing that shit. The people who cannot empathize with where the fuck we're coming from, we just don't want to be around you, like a narcissist. Like I said, if you have been raised by a narcissist, if you have been surrounded by narcissists, if you work with narcissists, if you've been in a relationship with narcissists, then you know what I'm talking about. The best thing to do is get the fuck away from them, because they will never change. They are only using you for fuel. They feed off of you like a fucking parasite. We just want to go no contact. That's it. Does that make us bad people for going no contact with people who have been enslaving us for generations? No. But a narcissist is going to say, you're racist. You're a bad person for wanting to go no contact. Of course, that's what the narcissist is designed to do. Of course they're going to say that. That's what a parasite needs to do to maintain the energy, the energy sucking of their host. They have to demonize you. They have to shame you. They have to guilt you to stay close, to keep you engaged in their emotional tentacles, hooks. And when you try to go no contact, that's where the smear campaign comes from. Oh, you're reverse racist. You're doing the same thing. No, we're not falling for it. Keep your little flying monkeys in their little cave, and it's not working anymore. We are aware of the tactics. So in this standardization of humanity, they made the highest form of living about love, reproduction, and possessions. This is all surface level, controllable bullshit. It's deeply ingrained in this standardized experience. Love your relationships. Get married, hurry up, get a job so you can attract the right mate. And when you attract the right mate, you reproduce and you gather a bunch of shit and then you fucking die. That is the control measure of this experience. That is the standardized experience. And even that love is not real love. That love that they're selling is standardized love. It's artificial love. It's love based upon the depths of the individual, who's based upon this shallow surface layer version of experience. And movies, music, and the system itself reinforces these mind controls daily. Movies, music, and the system itself reinforce love, reproduction, possession, get money, get bitches, get this house, get this car. And when you're locked into that ball of confusion, when you're locked into that control measure, like I said before, that standardized movement, the celebration, the Oscars, giving people awards for this shit, putting people on social media and giving them millions and millions of followers so people can try to be like them, try to emulate their actions and their ways of life. That takes the attention off of the criminal history, the criminal foundation of this system that's celebrated. Especially when they're always portraying themselves as the good guys, fighting for freedom. And we all know that they profit off of war. They profit off of having zero concern for nature, just destroying, living at the expense of nature. And us as a people, they don't give a fuck about you. This is why your medical industry makes its money. It lives on keeping you sick. And particular people sick. Like I said, look at all the liquor stores that are in the inner cities. Look at what redlining has done. A fucked up education system, the public education system, makes you sick. Having no grocery stores in the inner city makes you sick. And then even in those grocery stores, in those liquor stores, what kind of food are they selling you? Where are all your healthcare? Where the fuck does Whole Foods go? Is Whole Foods going to West Oakland? No. Whole Foods is going to as close to the Oakland Hills as possible, where the rich people live. Whole Foods is going to the suburbs. They ain't going where, and as obvious as that shit is, and people still go against it. No, that's not. That's not happening. That's where that shit comes out. Fuck out of here. And in that celebration of their standardized version of reality, that those illusions get placed above inherently and actively. They get placed above nature. They get placed above humanity. So in saying that, that's what I'm saying is, when you believe in that system, if you believe so much in that standard version of humanity, it doesn't matter how much against nature or humanity it goes, they'll be okay with the fucked up shit that happens as a result of their system. So this is why everybody is okay with war. Everybody is okay with destroying nature. Because if they don't destroy nature, then they won't be able to have the little creature comforts that they have. If they don't go to war, then they won't be able to have the freedoms that they have. So they accept it. And they accept it because they believe in this standardized version of humanity. So Western medicine, Western cosmology, intellect, beliefs, all going against what we have been living in balance with for millennia. All this shit, it's in the exact opposite of what the indigenous, the original, the First Nations people, everybody's been living with. It's the complete fucking polar opposite. And they push this idea of humanity to hide their differences. And those differences then become celebrated because they're the standard. And like I said before, who's the main demographic protecting this system? Who's the main ones waving these flags? Who's the main ones voting for these presidents? Pushing for these wars? Like I said, you have obviously people who are going to be against the wars, who are against the system. But what I'm saying is that for one moment, look at who's supporting this shit. Who's on the mainstream media? Who's running Fox News? What faces do they use to, what kind of magic do they use by putting those faces on there? It's a very particular group of people used for a very particular kind of magic. And like I said, it's not just in this nation. They are responsible for destabilizing entire countries. And if people say, oh, well, black people are doing it in Africa. Yes, that's why I said it's not limited to race. But what I'm saying is that these so-called black people who are put in power, just like in South America, who are they put in power by? When these countries get destabilized, why do they get destabilized? Usually because a particular leader there does not go along with the standardization system. So Gaddafi wasn't going along with the standardized thought frame, taken out. He was looking to unify Africa in its own thing, outside on its own standard of money, on its own standard of resources, outside of this superpower of the new world, taken out. And then Hillary was celebrated for actually doing that shit. This happens all over Africa, all over South America, all over the world. And these are the wars that don't get paid attention to because of that. And look at what's happening in Ukraine right now. They want you to pay attention to that because why? Because Russia is involved, and Russia is the big bad guy. He's the big bad wolf. And you need to be gathering your strength and your energy behind the good guys. Who's the good guy? If he's the bad guy, who's the good guy? So they're dehumanizing other nations, other people, in order to humanize themselves because they have no ability to humanize themselves naturally. If you have no ability to be naturally human, you have to dehumanize other people to appear more human. And today they are claiming to have the authority to be the awakening example, be the enlightened example, and pushing for one humanity. When you push for that one humanity, you're trying to hide underneath something. You're trying to hide there. And in that action, it's dismissing our ancestors and downplaying our healing. And that's the most fucked up shit. That's what's happening in the truther community. We're being dismissed. Our process, our healing is being dismissed. Our humanity is being dismissed because we're not playing the standard version, the new age version. People are doing this consciously and unconsciously to maintain control over us, control and power. And in reference to our differences, the shit that's being weaponized, just because our differences have been weaponized doesn't mean our differences are bad or shouldn't be celebrated. When we're talking about coming together and doing our own thing, we want to celebrate who we are as a people. And who we are as a people is different from other people. We dance different. We feel different. We communicate differently. This is why certain languages are actually counterproductive. We pray differently. Like, we interact. We spiritualize differently. We shouldn't be shamed or guilted for that. And a lot of the times we're shamed and guilted for that is because these individuals do not have their own version of that. If they do, it's very artificial. So they're trying to create this natural version of that by just saying, we're all one, we're all human. That's their fake version of what we've had for generations. And now that we're trying to get back to what we already had and we don't want to do what they're doing, they call us fucked up. They call us racist. They call us divisive. Get the fuck out of here. So when they celebrate that shallow shit, they're disempowering, however minute it is, because online it is happening. They're disempowering our movement by dismissing us and projecting onto us. And in that action, they're avoiding the responsibility that we're bringing to the surface of what they've been a part of for so many years. So they're doing two things, two of the main things: avoiding the responsibility of the criminal actions of their ancestors and criminal actions of what's happening right now. And they're dismissing us. So it's dismissal and projection. And like I said, when they do that, it's very convenient to avoid the history and avoid connecting with your ancestors. It's very, very convenient, because what happens, they can then play the equal victim as us. Oh, we're all slaves. This is why when you bring up slavery, they just say, oh, no, you can't talk about that. It's not about white people. We're all slaves today. Look in the comment section, see how many people have written that. It's probably been written in the live chat right now. We're all slaves. We're all victims. And they're doing that to maintain control. Now they want to maintain control of your forward progress. They maintain control over you, over your downward progress. Now that you're coming up, they want to maintain control over your upward, your forward progress. So they maintain control of how you should evolve, how you should become enlightened, how you should awaken, how you should move into the future. And there are various layers of this in the new age or technology or intellect or whatever it is. In the mainstream, it's about going to college and getting a job and getting married. In the new age, it's about becoming enlightened through their own version of spiritual gurus. It's all about control. So this is how this standardization of the perspective of humanity has been weaponized. And the examples, the people who are used for that standardization is a very particular group of people. This idea of so-called white people. And the direct threat against their standardized version are the ones that needed to be attacked the most. It's very simple. If your superheroes are the so-called white people, if the superheroes are the standard, then the villains have to be the opposite, and that's the so-called black people. This is why so-called black people around the world are hated and looked at a certain way and treated a certain way. Because the standard is to treat so-called white people another way. And the proof of that is obvious. White people get treated in different countries and they get treated amazing. This is not across the board, but in general, the idea of whiteness is held to a higher standard, especially when their God has been, the people have pictures of a blonde hair, blue eyed Jesus in completely black, dark skin ass areas. Their God looks like them. So that means their devil looks like who? Exactly. And ultimately, anybody that discourages you from connecting with your ancestors and telling the story of your history, just basic history, they do not have your best interests in mind. Anybody who tells you that you shouldn't be looking at that, you shouldn't be talking about that, they do not have your best interests in mind. They only have their interests in mind. When they make themselves into a victim as a response to you simply unveiling the history of your people, that is no different than how a narcissist defaults to projection and victimization as a means to control the narrative and avoid taking responsibility for their actions. So all these holidays, these broken theories, this fake intellect, entertainment, future programming, technology, medical genocide, war, deadly food, the users of dark and collective affecting magic, unjust authority, money, control, separation by class. All the people are following this shit. They're behind it. This is the standard. And then they got you singing this shit in the holidays. It's the most wonderful time. They're like singing this shit. The people who follow this system are the most inclined to defend this system and avoid seeking justice. That's dangerous. We're talking about seeking justice. And you have an entire weaponized group of people who are hell-bent against your justice. They would never lie about that. Who are these people that, when you hear that voice, they would never lie about that? Trust science. Who says that? Is it like a Filipino do a picture, a Samoan guy or something like that? No. You have a very specific picture and voice in your head when you hear those words. They would never lie about that. We should trust the science. It's a particular group of people. On the other side, we know they would lie to us. We know. So it's easier for us to look into this shit because they've been lying to us for years. We never trust these people. We never trust these motherfuckers. So we know. So so-called white people have only been recently been lied to. It's new to them. That's why they just get into, as soon as you start talking about slavery and shit, they just automatically, we're all slaves. It's new to them. They weren't saying that back in the day. No, we're all being persecuted by Jim Crow. No, you can't say that. That's not what it is. And they weren't saying it back then. They were behind them with fucking pitchforks and shit and burning and hanging people because the status quo was to get behind that shit. They weren't saying that we're all slave shit back then. No. But since it's new to them now they're behind it. Oh, we're all slaves. No. Don't work like that. And what I've been saying is the people who are saying that shit, the people who are now talking about we're all slaves, it's not a little thing. They're the front lines. They're the pawns of the fucking enemy system. The people who are saying things like all people are enslaved. We should be coming together, not dividing. When we bring the information to those of us, those people are fucking sick. If they're aware of it or not. That whole mentality, it's sick. When we bring the information to those of us who are still possessed and sick with what has happened to us, specifically as a result of slavery and racism, when we bring that shit to the surface and they say that shit, that's an enemy response. They're not for you. They're for your destruction and maintaining of where you are, your sickness and your disease. We're trying to fucking heal ourselves. And you have people who are saying, no, don't do that. What the fuck? Are your people disproportionately filling the prisons? No. It's a specific group of people. You don't want to talk about that truth though, do you? Are your people being slain in the fucking streets by these police officers who used to be slave catchers? No. Are your people being mentally seen as a certain way in comparison to other people? No. This is why they are taken out in the streets. Were the alcohol, the drugs, and the guns imported specifically into your communities to have a negative effect on you for the benefit of others? No. In the redlining, in the Homestead Act, and the headright system, were these systems set up specifically against you for the benefit of another people? No. The opposite. It was for us. It was against us for your people. So don't tell us we're wrong for trying to get the fuck out of this system and hold these motherfuckers accountable and seek justice for this shit. So you can take all that, we're all one, we're all human. We know that that's dismissive. Just in a live chat recently, when I was going on a live, I started talking about this. Somebody wrote in the comment section, it's not race, it's about money. They're dismissing everything you're saying. in order to protect themselves. Were the schools in your communities designed to generate a specific consciousness? No. In our communities, there were, to generate this diseased intellect, to promote the gang violence and all this other shit that goes on. So when I'm sharing this information, you're aware that I don't agree with terms, certain verbiage like black and white and all that other stuff. So when people are responding like that, it's an example of where they are, where their heads are. It's not an example on me. They try to project that onto me, but it's not about me. It's where they are. But this information needs to be shared to show a bigger picture. And for people who ain't even got into that space of realizing the smaller picture that adds up to the bigger picture, they want to project onto you. And that's what's happening. That's what's being publicized on social media and on these standardized versions of truth and all that other shit. It's reflective of their lack of capacity and their lack of being able to see a bigger picture. When these people are trying to attack me, and they're really just exposing their own ignorance and their own lack of empathy, their limited scope. And they're using this, part of this standardization they're using the authority of white silence to dismiss and downplay and ultimately disrespect our process in reference to our specific experience. Who the fuck are you to tell us what we should be doing? Oh, we're all one. It's not race. Who the fuck gave you the authority to tell us how we should heal, how we should process what our experience was? Who the fuck are you? Like I said in a previous comment response earlier, if Jewish people had specific diseases and disorders and possessions, like demonic possessions occurring as a result of the Holocaust, would these people, would they dismiss and downplay or attack them and their healers, their teachers? Would they attack them with the same amount of venom and vitriol that they attack us with? No. But since we're seen a certain way, and since we're such a threat to this standardized superpower, we're attacked. But it's different for other people. That example is the same as like the Ukraine shit. Why the fuck are they behind all this other stuff, but they don't give a fuck about other people being attacked, other nations being attacked? And like I said before, people are quick to attack you and label you by saying the system is using racism to control and distract us, but they won't acknowledge at all how they're pushing interracial relationships and the human agenda at the expense of our ancestral culture. So they'll attack you. They'll pay a very, very selective focus. They'll talk about how the system is using racism to distract and separate us, but they will conveniently not look at how it's also using interracial relationships to push a particular agenda, specifically that human agenda that these New Agers are pushing out there. This is why they're a threat, that whole human aspect. Oh yeah. Oh, you're wrong because you're talking about racism and the mainstream media is using racism to distract us. Well, they're also using interracial relationships to control us. You don't want to fucking talk about that because you have a part in that system. It's like in Hawaii, another example of this. Like there's natives who are adamantly against the colonization of the United States in Hawaii and the Polynesian people, adamantly against it. But you have some natives who are like dancing in the luau's and, working within the tourist system and all that other stuff. And those are the ones who are televised. Those are ones because they put out this atmosphere that everything is okay. And not all of them are doing it. Some of them are just doing it to survive, but some of them are doing it because they genuinely enjoy the tourist system and that colonial system. And those are the ones who are televised. Those are the ones who are put in the public offices. But is that the majority? Is that like the real? No, but that's the standardized selective view that needs to be publicized to make other people feel a certain way. And that's another example of real divisiveness, real division. But you don't hear anybody talking about that shit. They only want to talk about you when you talk about racism, about being divisive. Oh, get the fuck out of here. So they approve what you should be talking about. And like I said, do they ever talk about the black man dying first? This is the truth in movies. Who's the first one who dies first? The black guy. Who's being put in dresses? The black man. Who are they using to push this LGBT agenda. So-called black people are the heavy hitters in pushing this agenda out there. In movies, like I said, in the Eternals movie, the only gay person in there was the black man. The only superhero from another universe, a god pretty much, he had to be gay. Because that power can't even be displayed even artificially, even in a movie. And on the other hand, what do? They either bring you down that way or they bring you down another way. So you're a gangster, you're a thug, you're a drug dealer, you're the angry black woman, you're the kids who can't get through the black kids who can't get through school or struggling in school. You're on welfare. Whatever it is, they're controlling the way you see us. And that's a truth that even the truther community is not going to go into. Same way they do with the African kids, like Africa. Anytime people think about Africa, they only see these little kids, these little poor kids sitting with flies flying in their eyes and all that other shit. Well, what happens there? Well, first of all, the kids are poor and they need a white savior. That's what's happening. One, these black people, not even in the rest of the world, they're poor and they need help. Help from who? Help from the white savior. The system also uses so-called white women to have an effect on so-called black men. So they push these interracial relationships because they know when black men get in relationships with white women, they're not going to go to the depths of the system of racism, white supremacy, because it's ingrained in their own relationship. They have a block. They're put there like in a football defense team to get out there and block minds and people from going hard. And this is not just so-called white women, but this is all interracial relationships. But it's hard. It's like the peak. It's the heaviest blocker in that game is the so-called white woman, because she's also empowered as like what they did in the women's empowerment movement or the Black Power movement. They put women's empowerment in with the Black Power movement because it was ran by white women to have white beliefs be on display. And those white beliefs, which is that we're all one, we're all human, was designed to bring down the Black Power perspectives that were not human, that were also racist. That whole bullshit. Is it racist to state those facts? No. Is it racist to talk about that? No. Is it wrong? No, of course not. But these truther communities and these new age communities are inherently telling you it is by avoiding it. They're telling you it's wrong because they don't go into it. So the mainstream denies these realities. They won't talk about that. They won't talk about, white women, being used as a defense. They won't talk about, the black man dying first and the black men in dresses. They won't talk about that. They'll deny it. So they're denying it. And the truthers or conspiracy theorists avoid it. And the people who do talk about it are demonized. And why? Is because, like I said, the unifying and the activating of us as a people is a direct threat, is in fact the biggest threat to this system, to this standardization of humanity. And the truth involving so-called black people specifically is a non-issue because the majority of well-known truthers, the ones who are publicized, and progressives, like especially in the progressives, most of them are so-called white. This is why these issues don't get brought to the surface. And they can't look at themselves. If the issues are involving them and they haven't done that inner work, they're not going to be able to look at themselves. So they avoid the subject altogether. And they say they have to project onto the subject like something's wrong. And then nothing moves. This is why they are put out there as the standard. They themselves, even the way they truth themselves, is a defense mechanism. So you have topic-based truths, and they'll dismiss other truths involving them, especially the ones in a less glorified light. They will deny your truth to protect their own persona. Your truth is taboo. And even so-called black truthers avoid black truth because they have to cater to their audience. This is what happens when you get sucked in to the social media, YouTube focus group. They'll play the fence, or they'll play dumb, or they'll play like, oh, well, I'm not going to talk about that because, whatever, some bullshit ass excuse. But they're really doing it because they know once they go into that, once they start talking about that, they'll have to keep going. It's like a ball. It's like a snowball. Once it starts rolling down that hill, there ain't no stopping it. You can't go back. And when they play that fence, they're playing a fence like a defense fence. It's dismissive, and it's leaving out hella other truths, very important truths and realization. And like I said, it's so dangerous because these truthers, these conspiracy theorists, all these other stuff, they might not even know. They're unaware that they're pushing a particular narrative. They're pushing a particular agenda. Just like the Europeans coming to the US, for the most part, didn't know they were setting the frameworks for the superpower of the New World Order. They just thought and were told they were coming over here to start a new life and be free and be a part of a new world. They didn't know that they were setting the foundation for the superpower that was going to destroy the whole fucking world. They were aware that they were going to fuck over a bunch of indigenous people. They were aware of that. I'm not saying they weren't aware of that. A lot of them were, if not most of them were. And they just didn't care because we had been dehumanized. So they went along with it. But as far as the future, did they know that they were setting the the baseline for the superpower that was going to do that to the entire world? I would say a minority of them knew. A small minority of them knew. But the majority of them didn't know. So then it wasn't them like trying to do that. They weren't trying to create a standardized. Some of them were though. But that's what I'm saying. These moves are made way the fuck out. So the same moves that they weren't aware of that. It's the new age truthers and all that other shit and conspiracy theorists today who are avoiding this truth and putting out this humanity new age shit, this love. They're just like the Europeans back then. They think they're doing something, but they don't know decades and way down the line they're actually setting the stage for a new world order. So back then, they just thought they were helping humanity evolve out of its savage nature and into a new world of wealth and prosperity. And today it's this idea of evolving out of war and destruction into peace and love, one humanity. Whereas back then it was Christianity. Today it's humanity. Back then it was Christianity. And like I said earlier, it's their insecurities behind this. They follow the system because they're insecure about themselves. They don't have this real history. So the recessive genetics and all that other stuff, it's part of it. It's not everything, but it is very much a part of it. So they follow the system as a safety measure. And to overcompensate those insecurities, they are trying to become the apex human, have placed themselves in the world as the apex human, living in an illusion. It's the same way like dudes with little dicks or people with a Napoleon complex. They have to overcompensate. They got to buy a big car, like have the finest woman. They got all the money in the world. In a way, like so-called white people have a Napoleon complex in reference to humanity. It's been constantly destructive. This is why their idea of civilization is based on a constant state of war and dominance. This is also why they generated this idea, this artificial theory of dinosaurs, the apex dinosaurs, living and then becoming extinct. So we were the savage indigenous people were like the dinosaurs. We lived and then we became extinct because there was a new apex in town. So they validate this apex purpose of humanity, of the world. They created this dinosaur, this Big Bang, and then behind the dinosaur shit is the Big Bang shit. And then they install technology to validate that. And then they conveniently leave the oceans out of this. This world is mostly ocean. But the consciousness of the people, the beings in the ocean, is completely left out of the equation. And they leave it out because they don't go into consciousness. It's all about war and destruction. And another part of this is the avoiding of the Sabe or the Sasquatch, because it's another form of consciousness that's being avoided. If they acknowledge the Sabe, then they are no longer the apex being, consciously or even physically. It throws holes in all the evolution and everything. So all their sciences, all their intellect, all their institutions all crumble if they start acknowledging. If they acknowledge the history, crumble. If they acknowledge beings like the Sabe, crumble. If they acknowledge the non-heliocentric universe, crumble. All this shit comes down. And the defense, like I said, the defense of that is to celebrate the next illusion, which is this: we're all one, we're all humans. It's that simple. Shut up. Just come together in love and light, and just don't fight and don't be in war, and everything will be okay. Fight climate change. What do you mean you don't want to fight climate change? Oh, you don't believe in climate change? You know how that whole shit goes on. So they'll deflate all of your theories, all your perspectives, in order to project, to inflate their own theories, their own illusions. And specifically with the Sabe, if they start to even acknowledge any of that, they'd have to like see the science in that, how they have a relationship with nature and their possible extraordinary abilities. They'd have to acknowledge all that shit. And if you acknowledge that, then you have to acknowledge that we have extraordinary abilities. That's going to empower us. And if you empower us, that's going to disempower the system. And all of that, everything that I've shared in this video about going into the depths of our history, breaking down the standardization of humanity and why that is existing out there, all of that is empowering the people. It's not to create more division, not whatever people are talking about who have this shallow interpretation of what I'm just saying. No. Any of this information, seen to the depths of what it is to empower the people. If you empower people, you're going to disempower this system. And that's the biggest threat.